What's up people, Darkside here of the Cerulean Ocean. I'm just going to do a quick video to explain the difference between swords, sword drop patterns and what they're useful for. So what I've done here is I've just went to the YPP page, looked for sword, and I've got all these patterns here. Things that I'd probably suggest reading are reading all of this. Black Dice Sword and Sprinkle Guide is always a good read. Those are the basics if you're going to get into high-end sword fighting. If you're just looking for a sword that's good for you, ignore it. I'll try and explain what you need. Alright, we've got here the back sword. I'm not going to do every sword because lots of them are useless and it's not really my point. But the back sword's an interesting one because you get the collector's edition, box edition, and you can choose to have a backsword at all times, and it's actually an alright bot fighting weapon. It's got I should do this first. Okay, what determines what you send as your pattern? Basically the first two rows are your sprinkles. No matter how much you sprinkle, it's just these repeated. You do 6 sprinkles, you send that row. If you do 8 sprinkles, you'll send that row and a couple up here. 12 sprinkles, you do both rows. But if you do like 24, you do that row, that row, that row, that row. It's just layered. It doesn't go up into here. For swords, what happens is you send the entire row. So say you send a 4 high, it'll send all of this. But if you go any higher than the pattern, it's the top 4 rows that it's sent. So things like the back sword, the falchion's just having this repeated. Same with the foil, stick does it, stiletto does it. But for things like this cleaver, it'll send all of this, and then if it goes any higher, it'll just repeat these 4 here. So what's one like the rapier? As you can see, this is actually really easy. But when it's these rows repeated, if you send a really large strike with a rapier, if it's these rows repeated, it's very powerful. But the small ones, not so much. So anyway, let's start back here. The back sword's a decent bot bashing weapon if you have one, because it's got lots of different colours in its sprinkle pattern. Strikes the same. They're not the best because they tend to just fall from one side, so it'll only send 2 colours, but across the length of a fight it'll balance itself out. For fighting players, not so much, because say you send a strike over here, they just break the blues, all the yellows go down. It's very easy to chain, so it's not the best sword for fighting players, but bots, I'd still say it's pretty good. I didn't do horizontal swords. Horizontal swords is, say you send in one from the left, it'll take these 2 rows on the side, it'll send a vertical. Say you sent a vertical down here, it would send this pattern, but a horizontal is this pattern just flipped. So that'll enter and go towards the right, and that'll be towards the left. It isn't sending like a cut off from the middle. That's what I originally thought. I think I just misread something, but it sends this. So decent things. Cleaver. Let's do actual swords now. Cleaver's an interesting pattern. It's got this going down diagonally with the yellows here linking it, but it's still a pretty powerful sword. If you send a very large strike and then follow it up with sprinkles, it's alright. It's not it's not a commonly used sword. It's not the best. People just buy it because it's a cleaver, but it is actually it's an alright sword. Just there's better for any style. Cutlass is terrible. The Daddy-O, I'll have to cover this. Very few high-end players use it because it's not actually that good. It's got a monochromatic sprinkle pattern, which means that you have to play against it with a safe build, which is annoying and boring. The strikes are, because this will just layer it. You can't, with this you can build red there, green there, yellow there, and you can usually use it to build combos. clear it off. That if they're just sprinkling, anytime you get a green, you'll have to dump it somewhere, and it'll be hard to link it all together too. So when the green breaker comes, you can clear off all the greens. You will have a lot of blue and a lot of red on your board, which will be annoying to deal with, but a good player can usually manage to get it. The horizontal strikes are actually really good, because if you imagine this strike going across your board, you've got the red block here, but that'll hit over to the side and then get covered up by the blues. This one you've got greens and yellows, so you'll have to use 2 breakers to get it vaguely clear. Same with here. It's very powerful. Like, it won't land flat, bits of it will fall down, but still really powerful. It's got quite a decent strike pattern. It's relatively easy to unravel. It reminds me of this bit. You hit the reds, all the blues fall down. You hit the greens, all the yellows fall together. So it's pretty easy to chain to, but it takes a few breakers to do it, which is good. So it's annoying. It's not the best sword. Honestly, if you're using this sword, you'll never get to the very top, because it's not a sword because it's a sword where you'll sometimes win when you shouldn't have, and you'll never really learn. So it's not one that I suggest people to use, even though it will get them a higher rating, because they won't actually get better at sword fighting. Got the falchion 3-color drop pattern, pretty easy to build off of. The multi-roll sprinkles are alright, fairly difficult to deal with, but it's a terrible first roll sprinkles. Multi-roll's alright. The strikes are pretty good, because it's just every colour. All the colours are in there. They're not all together, they're quite far apart. If you send a big strike, they'll have to hit yellows and then reds, and then the blues will be in a weird place because that'll fall down. You have to get rid of that, and it's just it takes a while to build it all together to actually send it back. So that's why it's quite used. It's also, like I said, the sprinkles aren't that bad, so it's quite balanced, but it just favours larger strikes more. Foil, terrible. Katana never gets used. This is a terrible sprinkle pattern. The strike pattern, it may look good, but because of the uneven nature of the board and the fact that you can just like go under it and break these reds, you can usually get all of these to fall together. Longsword, it's the longsword, the short sword, and the rapier are the non-subscriber weapons that's used a lot. This seems to be in the middle. Honestly, I'd use, if a non-subscriber asks me for a sword, I'd say a rapier if they send really large attacks, short sword if they don't, but my real suggestion would be to subscribe or buy doubloons. Longsword, terrible sprinkle pattern. Very large strikes, it gets alright because it gets all covered up, and you've got dud pieces here, which will be annoying, but getting this to link up is relatively easy, so it's not that good. Poniard, oh look, everything's linked up. We'll just skim over that. The rapier, I told you the strength of it is really large strikes. So if you send really large strikes, if you're really quick at opening, get this, because the sprinkles don't directly line up either. No, the sprinkles don't directly line up, so it's really powerful. If you send a large attack, you get some sprinkles on top of it. You send a smaller attack, you get some sprinkles, and then sprinkles can usually finish them off that way. And then it gets towards the mid game to the end game, and I don't think pattern is that useful there. It's all about board management. So things like the Daddio is better in the late game because makes board management more difficult with the monochromatic sprinkles, but in the early game it's really easy. Saber, roughly the same as the Daddio. It's got these reverse swords. It's where your no. Oh, I know how to find it. No, it tells you in the saber though. Blue, green or purple. The first sword colour is blue, green or purple. It reverses the sword. The falchion is considered more difficult to be reversed because basically this pattern just gets flipped. So say this was say this magically became a reverse sword. The reds would be over there, the yellows would be over there, and this would be column 4. And because of the 2 colours and the column 4 sprinkle pattern, it's considered more powerful. That is the only real change, is when the colours that go down the layer that the pieces drop in are different colours. If at the very last second they get the breaker they need, they won't break out as much, because the columns to the left and to the right will usually have dumped pieces in them, but this entire column could easily have quite a lot of green, allowing them more space to get more breakers. So that's why the falchion is considered more powerful as a reversed sword. Saber's considered more powerful as well because these 3 become over there, meaning in this area over here. The right side of someone's board is usually where they dump pieces, because the left side is more space, so that's where most builds go. So these dump pieces can usually get covered up. It'll make any combos going down here more difficult. Don't think that's right. It's considered more powerful because the monochromatic is where the pieces enter. That'll do. The horizontals, pretty terrible. Large strikes, these repeated, terrible. This repeated, it's just green all the way down. This is a heavy sprinkle sword, relying mostly on breaker droughts. The correct way to play the saber is just consistency. You need to consistently sprinkle, always. You have to save breakers to use them during your breaker droughts. And then basically, because of the monochromaticness of it, they'll have such a hell of a time linking up anything that isn't what you're sending. So all they'll really be able to send in a decent strike is red and blue. Scimitar, it's an alright sword. It forces you to build towards the edge. You want to send consistent strikes, because if you send like a 6 high, it'll send that and then that. So these reds will be covered up, and then you want to have sprinkles on top of it, because then the blues will cover up the edges. So you want to send small strikes, but more often. So you, instead of going for a bingo or a donkey at the start, you go for a triple. It's quite a good sword. Not a lot of players use it. The main thing with the scimitar is it's actually quite a defensive sword. You just want to keep the clearest board you can, because if you're keeping a clearest board, you are constantly sending small attacks, which is exactly what you want to do. And because of the pattern of it, they can easily send you large attacks, so they'll be sending small attacks. And the most common sword is probably still the falchion, which isn't that good for small attacks because it's easier to unravel and get everything to join together, because these greens will be linked together. The yellows will be easier to clear out in small attacks, but they'll be linked together quite easily. So the falchion isn't the best for small strikes, but the scimitar is. So the best way to use it is to constantly send small strikes, to force them to send small strikes to do that. The short sword is cheap as chips. It looks like an easy pattern, but it's just like the sprinkles don't line up with the strikes, and the strikes don't line up that well because of how it would land. These would probably link together and you'd be able to get something there, but you can cover it up again with, say, a horizontal, because they don't link up, but horizontals might hit the bottom. The skull dagger, difficult pattern because it's just 1-1. They're not together, that's there, and they get covered up by multi-roll sprinkles. Multi-roll sprinkles will cause, if you send quite a few rolls, you can usually break down the edges, but the middle will be quite untouched, which would mean dangerous. And then occasional strike will cause it so there's loads of greens in there, making it more difficult to send these out, but the greens are easily covered up. Strikes down here are annoying, are very easy to clear, but you can easily cover them up with the spring. Basically with this sword you want to strike with sprinkles on top, because the strike will come in and then the sprinkles will make it so you can't access the strike without using breakers, and when they get the breakers you'll also get the breakers so you can sprinkle on top again. This is the sword I use. It's a balanced sword because of the layering effect, but it's got an emphasis on sprinkles. Basically the way I think of being able to choose between the falchion and the skull dagger is, if you are more likely to extend a combo with sprinkles rather than trying to make the actual strike bigger, try out a skull dagger. It is a very powerful weapon and I would strongly suggest it. The stick's terrible. Never use a stiletto, no one does, there's no point. There's the trident, and that's it. So yeah, skull dagger's good, scimitar's annoying, not a good learning weapon. Oh, scimitar is alright. I don't know why it's not used more often, but there are people that do, and they do have the advantage over me even using the skull dagger, because it's just an annoying sword to use, and I never really know what to expect with the scimitar because I always forget the pattern. Falchion's been used so often that I can just unravel it in my sleep. The saber I wouldn't suggest to a new player because you don't really learn anything, and that's the same thing for the daddio. Very good if you send larger strikes and you're a non-subscriber. Terrible. Very large strikes are alright, but I suggest the rapier because it's got the better sprinkle pattern. No one uses it. Sprinkles are utterly terrible, and in PvP you will always send sprinkles at some point or another. Strikes are alright, but the sprinkles all line up with the high-end strikes. The foil is fun to play when you've both using foils, it actually is, but otherwise it's pretty terrible. Falchion's pretty good, balance, favours strikes more than sprinkles, but still. Dark is terrible. Daddio, you won't learn anything, but it's a good sword, I just don't think it should be used as often as it is. Cutlass is terrible. Cleaver is an interesting sword, not that good. The sprinkles are actually alright. This is probably good for fighting a bot as long as you send like 2 strikes at the same time, because you'll send a strike here and a strike here, meaning there'll be a balance. Backsword is good for fighting bots if you have one, and I think that's it. I'd say that's it. Alright, so yeah, I hope that helps you find a sword that you need, that you want, and I'll see you guys next time.